Welcome back to Hangar Garage, where it is yet another video on my 1991 Autozam Scrum Kei Truck. And last time you saw this thing, it was screaming down the road, making a whole lot of noise and going kind of quick, but it still had a lot of issues. So I've torn it apart to address, first off, a tiny little fuel leak. Secondly, the brakes sucked. I figured out this right front caliper was not calipering. I pulled it apart and the bleeder screw was clogged, so I drilled that out. And now the brakes, I think, are working right. I haven't tested it yet, as everything else is still apart. I'm rerouting the coolant hoses. The top one here used to go down and then back up, so I took out that low spot and added a coolant temperature sensor. That will feed into the coolant temperature gauge, which is not here. I have to order that still. And I'm also putting in a Takata harness that'll go right here that my friend Kyle gave to me. Thank you, Kyle. I'm going to brace it through the cab here, and it's probably not going to do any better than the factory seatbelt, but it will look cooler. That's kind of what I'm going for. I've also made a little bracket to stop the air filters from falling off. These are the finest Chinese air filters to go on my Ninja ZX11 carburetors. So this kind of homemade bracket will keep them on there. Oh, paint's still wet. And I have some parts on order for it too. First off, I have left front strut, because that's why the tire is kind of crooked like that. That is coming from the Philippines, and I just ordered some tires today for it, and they're going to go on not those trailer wheels, but I have some nice wheels coming for. Well, not really nice, they're reps that I had on another car before, but they are much wider and hopefully much cooler looking. I know that they will fit on the front of the brakes, but I'm not sure if they're going to rub when I actually put my weight on the seat, and they will fit in the rear after I put some spacers on there. I had a hard time finding spacers that fit over this, and you may ask yourself, why am I using spacers? I don't like the idea of using spacers, but I put a Kia Cephia strut tower right in the way of the tires, so I'm not going to move that. I've decided that I am, in fact, going to put the dash in, so I'm going to rip out all of the vents, because I don't need those where I'm going. I do still plan on leaving in the HVAC system, but probably without the vents, so I can fit all the stuff behind it that I want to and have less just clutter, really. But I have not yet hooked up the heater lines because it is summertime, so I'll see if this whole thing works enough for me to actually want to drive it in the wintertime, and if it does, then I can hook those up. But the dash is now in and bolted down. I unfortunately have lost one of these little switches, but the rest of them are in, and I found that for the switch for the fan, that is included in this wiring harness here, so I am cutting that out to just wire that in, because the rest of that is stuff that I no longer have. And here's a little harness for the fan switch, so that is all that's coming off the main harness now. After that, I'm moving over to the left front where I'm replacing the strut. This is the old strut, and it is bent up there and down here because it got T-boned, but that's why the wheel was all crooked. At least that's what I'm hoping is the only reason. This is the new one, came from the Philippines by way of South Korea and China, but it is finally here, and I'm going to throw that in. Boom, no more crazy camber on the left front. That fixed the problem, which I'm very glad for. Back on the inside, and now I'm figuring out where do I want to put the gauges. And I had them up there for a bit and realized that kind of looks funky, so I think I'm going to take apart the original speedometer and mount them inside there, so it'll look completely factory. I cut apart the speedometer housing, and I cut apart a section of a Rubbermaid plastic container, and I super glued that in there, so now I can mount the gauges in there. And now the glue is drying on this masterpiece. My vision is let down by my lack of fabrication skills, but the tachometer sits here, and the coolant temp gauge sits here, and this is my GPS speedometer that really just fits in there like factory. It's bad looking, but I think it should work. Back in the truck, a lot has also changed. I have installed the harness. This bar here is painted, braced into the side of the cab. I've done all the wiring for all the gauges. I have no idea if any of it works, but it's all hopefully done. This is all routed back through the firewall, which is just the floor. The temp sensor is routed into the sensor on the coolant hose, and the tachometer input is routed to the coil pack. I'm hoping that works. But I've got a seat built in for the passenger, and I've got the switch panel installed. This gives me a voltage gauge, and this is where I can plug in my GPS speedometer. And I've got some extra charge ports right there if I ever decide to take this thing on a road trip, which that's probably never gonna happen. And it is a little while later, and the interior is looking just about done, I think. So for a full tour of the interior, first off, really cheap steering wheel. Secondly, harnesses from Kyle. Thank you, Kyle. A bar that bolts through the cab and probably will hold them. I'm really hoping, because I'm heavy. There is a door speaker in here, only one, of course. I ripped out all the wiring for the radio because the only sound system I need is that thing right there to make really loud, obnoxious noises. As far as the operation of the vehicle, first thing you do here is the battery cutoff. That turns on the coolant temp gauge and the tachometer. And you flick those switch right here, and then you get a voltage gauge into power outlets here, which power my GPS digital speedometer, which is very poorly installed, but I'm just gonna move on from there. Then I've also got my fan switch right here. Got the ignition for the drivetrain. Then here's the ignition for the body. Turn that. Then you got a fan, which works, which is pretty neat. And then on the body side, I have headlights. Got low beams, got high beams. I've got wipers. Look at that. I've got flashers. Yeah. And look at these. Even those work. Those are so funny looking. I've even got an LED dome light. I've got a cracked rearview mirror that I'll probably do nothing about. Moving on from the inside and onto obviously the big elephant not in the room, and that's the bed. See, it says Autozam scrum on there, 4-wheel drive, not anymore. So this obviously no longer is going to bolt directly on, so I'm gonna have to cut it up and be a little bit creative with how I want to attach it. But my goal is for it to at least look somewhat like a Kei truck from a distance. And after my first attempt, it looks kind of like a Kei truck. I am definitely going to need to beef up the rear suspension. With the weight of the bed, it sags quite a bit. I still obviously have to fill in some spots here. And with my tiny little trailer tires, it looks very weird back there. After some more trimming, the bed is finally attached. I put some little rubber blocks that I took off my lifted smart car, and that's leveled it out a little bit. Later on, I might do more rubber blocks or do the proper thing and get different springs. But as for the bed, it is fully bolted down. I had to do a lot of trimming to make it sit. Now it's time to add back the pieces that I cut out. I want to put a piece here to cover up all of that, and I want to put the piece right here, maybe on hinges so I can still reach wiring if I need to. But I've now got running lights, cool brake lights, and turn signals and flashers. Woohoo! I cut up this panel and I cut up that panel. That's going to cover the gas tank, and this is going to cover my terrible wiring. And I went to Home Depot and I got a couple handles and a few hinges. That's going to make this one easily openable. This one's going to be more securely mounted. That's going to cover this space right here. This is going to be hinged like that so I can put fuel in it. Just like that. This panel is pretty securely mounted. I've got a crossbar here and a crossbar there, and that's bolted to that. And then the back is hinged with a very super custom bolt with a hole drilled through it and a little thing I found in a box. And a handle. Yeah, and you can access my wiring, which I hope to not have to do. Secure. And now with the bed sides on, it's starting to look like a real vehicle. This gap here is still pretty funky, but I have something to fix that. My tires came in, and those are the wheels that they're gonna go on, and that is gonna fill that gap nicely, or so I hope. But in the meantime, I'm gonna see if it still drives. Work. Okay, there was low beams. Tachometer seems to be working. I think it might be a little bit off though. It's probably reading like half of what it's actually at. It's backfiring pretty good. I think something's wrong. I think we got a couple cylinders that aren't firing.
We gotta have a couple cylinders, right?
We got 4 of them. gauges are all working. The tachometer looks to be working. I'm not sure if it's adjusted correctly. Coolant gauge is working. I opened like a dream, got my fan on, and it fired right up this time, so I don't know what was wrong with it last time. So crazy enough, as it turns out, these little rubber blocks, they're not really giving it enough lift in the rear to make really any difference. But I'm still not going to do the right thing. I have got some little rubber spacers off of Amazon that smell so bad. They sit in the spring like so. I cut them in half, put half on the top and half on the bottom on each side, and then supplemented it with a couple of those little rubber blocks, and that seems to be making a bit of difference. And now for some more test drives. How you liking it?
Good.
It is a lovely evening. My tires have been mounted and balanced by Tight and Tidy Racing in Renton, which I would recommend. I'm not being paid to say that, but it's a nice guy. Now I'm going to see how these look on there. Hopefully they fit. Tires are throwing so many rocks. First test drive with the new wheels and tires is going well. It's cruising very smooth. Everything seems balanced. Nothing's rubbing. So somehow, and I don't know even how I'm saying this, these do not rub at all. Even with my weight in it, getting on it, there's no rubbing, which is just insane because these are huge and they look a little bit goofy, but you know, I think it kind of matches the vibe. But that's gonna do it for this episode of whatever the heck I'm making here. So thanks for watching, and until next time.